Coming up on Arirang News, South Korea's political parties start work on a new consultative body to coordinate Seoul's response to Japan's export restrictions. It'll include representatives of the government and the private sector. A boycott in South Korea of products from Japan puts a major dent in sales, and the movement could get even bigger as Japan prepares to take even harsher retaliatory moves in the weeks to come. And with so much on the government's plate at home and abroad, President Moon Jae-in and key members of his cabinet cancel their summer vacations. They'll be working on the trade situation, North Korea, and the government's proposed extra budget. It's 4 p.m. here in Seoul. Thank you for joining us on our afternoon broadcast. I'm Devin Whiting. South Korea has sent back 3 North Korean fishermen who crossed the inter-Korean sea border over the weekend. Seoul's Unification Ministry says they were sent back after questioning. It notified the North this morning via the Joint Liaison Office, and the crew and the fishing boat have both left. Late Saturday, the boat crossed the northern limit line and entered South Korean waters. The South Korean military towed the boat to a naval base. The North Korean crew said they'd crossed the border because of a navigational error and they did not want to defect. But there had to be a detailed probe because the South Korean military suspected the boat might have belonged to the North Korean military. It's vacation season for many South Koreans, but President Moon Jae-in has decided not to take a break this year. There are just too many things he has to deal with, including Japan's export restrictions and North Korea's recent missile tests. Our presidential office correspondent Shin Se-min reports.
No summer vacation for the South Korean president. The top office said Sunday that President Moon Jae-in will not be taking his pre-scheduled summer break this year, originally set for the last week of July. Instead, the president will be at the Blue House working as usual. He did, however, reportedly order other top office employees to continue their vacation plans as scheduled. He is skipping this year's summer vacation to focus on the key challenges facing South Korea. Japan is reportedly preparing to expand its restrictions to other sectors by taking South Korea off a whitelist of trusted importers, a move that could seriously disturb the supply chains of more than 1,000 items. And Japan's cabinet is likely to decide on Friday, August 2nd, whether to endorse the removal of Seoul from Tokyo's whitelist. And President Moon's cancellation of his summer break may be to show his will to harden Seoul's fallback plan and send a message to Japan over how serious he is taking the issue. As well as that, North Korea's latest solemn warning over South Korea's joint military drills with the U.S., which Pyongyang showed by firing 2 of its new tactical guided weapons over the East Sea on July 25th. Also putting off a summer break, Korea's National Security Advisor Chung Eui-yong, who reportedly canceled his leave last week. The president's canceling of his summer vacation this July shows the seriousness of the issues that the country is faced with, and the presidential office has yet to confirm when the president will be taking his leave or if he'll take any leave at all. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
And President Moon's not the only one canceling his vacation. The Prime Minister and the Deputy Prime Minister, who also serves as Finance Minister, are doing the same. According to his office, Prime Minister Lee Na-kyun will be working as usual through his week-long summer leave, initially scheduled to start on August 8th. Finance Minister Hong Nam-ki has canceled his one day off, which was today, the 29th. And the Minister of Trade, Industry and Energy, Sung Yoon-mo, has also reportedly called off his summer vacation set for mid-July. These key cabinet members will instead focus on issues like Japan's retaliatory trade restrictions, as well as the government's supplementary budget bill that's been waiting for parliamentary review for nearly 3 months. It's been a sensational season for South Korean golfer Jin-young. She's won her second major of the year in a 2-shot victory at the 2019 LPGA Evian Championships. Lee Seung-jae has the details.
South Korea's Jin-young didn't let a little rain put a damper on her quest for a second major victory of the season. On Sunday, she fired a 4-under 67 to win the 2019 LPGA Evian Championship at Evian Le Bon by 2 strokes with a 15-under par overall. Despite the start of the 4th and final day of the competition being delayed by 2 hours due to the wet conditions, the 24-year-old kept her composure and took advantage of her playing partner and close friend Kim Hyo-ju's late collapse to cruise to victory. Her first LPGA title of the season came at the 2019 ANA Inspiration in April. For the 2018 LPGA Rookie of the Year, the victory means she moves back to number 1 in the world rankings, leapfrogging Park Sung-hyun, who finished the tournament tied for 6th. The winner's check of $615,000 also catapults her to the top of the LPGA money list with nearly $2 million. Ko's victory also ends a streak of 10 different players winning the previous 10 majors. And another major kicks off on Thursday, and it's a big one, the Women's British Open. It's the first time since 1960 that 2 women's majors have been played in back-to-back weeks. 이 승재, Arirang News.
Earlier this year, South Korea mourned the loss of one of the women who had been sexually enslaved by Japan during World War II. Kim Bokdong was admired here and around the world for her campaign to get justice for the victims. As our Oh Soo-young reports, her legacy will now live on in a film coming out next week.
27 years of fighting for justice. After being systematically raped by Japanese soldiers from the age of 14, Kim Bokdong passed away earlier this year at the age of 92 without the apology or redress she hoped to see from the Japanese government. But her story doesn't end with her death. Her mission lives on.
We can forgive them if they say sorry or forgive us. Then we would be able to forgive them.
A documentary about Kim's life captures the raw emotion in her voice, the anguish as she recounts her past during her testimony in 1992. She was one of the first so-called comfort women to speak out about the Japanese Imperial Army's wartime sexual enslavement of Korean girls. The 105-minute film shows that Kim should not just be remembered as a victim of a painful tragedy and heinous atrocity who was alienated by her family. Kim became a symbolic figure in Korea and around the world, advocating for the anti-war movement, uncovering the truth about sexual slavery, and campaigning for women's rights issues. Key moments of her lifelong fight for justice, the weekly Wednesday protests in front of the Japanese embassy in Seoul, and the installation of the Statue of Peace there and in other parts of the world, are highlighted in the film. The film's director, investigative journalist Hong Won-gun, says he hopes to make it clear that Kim's work isn't over. The victims of Japan's sex slavery have yet to receive a genuine, heartfelt apology that they can make peace with in their lifetime.
I think the movie will inspire Koreans to think about this issue in a level-headed way and consider what we can do about it.
But he says time is running out. Only 21 Korean victims are still alive, as most of them have already passed away. The film will hit the big screen on August 8th. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
South Korea's political parties will launch a consultative body to deal with Japan's export curbs this Wednesday. The Secretaries General of the 5 main parties met Monday to fine-tune the details. The body will include rival lawmakers as well as related government ministers and representatives of the private sector. In their first meeting on Wednesday, the rival parties said they plan to be briefed on the current situation by the Finance Ministry. The parties also agreed to expand participation down the line. This comes after President Moon Jae-in and the chiefs of the 5 main parties had agreed earlier this month on the need for a unified national response. The South Korean parliamentary delegation that went to Washington last week to discuss Japan's export restrictions returned to Seoul on Sunday. Arriving at Incheon International Airport, the ruling Democratic Party's Lee Soo-hyuk said U.S. lawmakers understand that their role is crucial in helping to resolve the trade conflict, but they wanted to avoid giving the impression they were taking sides. The main opposition Liberty Korea parties, Kim Se-yeon, said they confirmed that there are many in Washington whose opinions differ from Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's. South Korean consumers, too, are doing what they can to pressure Japan into ending its trade curbs. A growing boycott has significantly hurt sales of Japanese products here, notably in luxury vehicles and alcohol. Our Kim Yo-sun has more.
Amid escalating trade tensions between Seoul and Tokyo, South Korean consumers are boycotting a whole spectrum of Japanese products, everything from beer to cars. According to industry sources, sales of Japanese beer at South Korean convenience store chain CU plunged 40% in July. The market share of Japan's Asahi beer dropped nearly 3%, losing its title of the best-selling imported beer in the country. The boycott against Japanese beer first began among smaller businesses, with mid-sized convenience stores in Seoul displaying stickers that said they do not stock Japanese alcohol. Over 23,000 retail outlets were participating in the campaign as of mid-July. Backed by the scorching heat and the boycott campaign picking up steam, sales of South Korean beer are rapidly increasing.
South Korean beer sales have jumped as consumers are reluctant to buy Japanese beer. Eventually, it even dragged down the market share of Japanese beer in major retail stores.
Japanese cars are also taking a hit. In the first half of this year, over $6 million worth of Japanese vehicles were imported to South Korea, a whopping 25% increase from the same period last year. However, the figure decreased significantly this month following Tokyo's trade restrictions on Seoul.
Japanese automobiles were popular among South Koreans, but the situation will be very different in the later half of this year due to the increasing anti-Japanese sentiment across the country.
While Tokyo is scheduled to decide on August 2nd whether to remove Seoul from its whitelist of countries that enjoy preferential treatment in trade, it's left to be seen whether the boycott will eventually lose steam or intensify to levels as yet unseen. Kim Hye-sun, Arirang News.
As mentioned, it looks like South Korea will have to brace for even more trade restrictions from Japan. These could affect a wide range of local industries from cars to electronics and high-tech goods. Yoon reports.
It is highly likely that Japan will exclude South Korea from its so-called white list of 27 countries that receive preferential treatment on trade. Once removed, Japanese exporters won't be able to ship goods to South Korea unless they are approved on a case-by-case basis, along with the required documentation. The process will take about 3 months, causing inevitable delays in shipping and the production of goods. Experts say industries that are heavily dependent on intermediary goods from Japan will be affected. Nearly 1,100 items will fall under new restrictions, including those related to automobiles, electronics, and machinery. Among them are silicon wafers used in semiconductors, which are almost monopolized by Japanese firms. Carbon fibers used in aircraft and automobiles, machine tools, and goods related to fine chemicals could also be affected.
Japan is more likely to target South Korea's high-tech industries instead of the conventional one. For example, cars using internal combustion engine wouldn't cause so much of a problem, but hydrogen cars may bump into trouble if a key material is missing. Also, Japan may target non-memory semiconductors rather than DRAM.
Some experts pointed out that South Korean companies should look for alternative suppliers in other countries to cushion themselves against the imminent blow.
Companies may consider taking over high-tech firms through M&As to shorten the time. Aside from Japan, hydrogen fluoride used in semiconductors and displays also come from China and Taiwan. So turning the attention to companies in those countries can be one of the possible measures.
But experts also point out that for some materials there are no viable alternatives to Japanese suppliers. In the long term, they say Seoul and Tokyo must sit down for talks to solve the issue diplomatically and dial down the conflict. Yoon, Arirang News.
It's time now for an in-depth look at the markets on this Monday, and for that I'm joined on the line by Dr. Hwang Se-eun, Research Fellow at the Korea Capital Market Institute. Dr. Hwang, thank you for coming on today.
Thank you for having me today.
So we ended last week with U.S. stocks up again, the S&P at another all-time high. Here in Korea, though, stocks starting the week sharply lower. What's the story today?
In Wall Street, stocks ended higher Friday after strong earnings from tech giants like Alphabet and Intel, and a better-than-expected GDP report pushed the S&P 500 to a new all-time high. The S&P 500 gained 0.75%. The Nasdaq also hit an all-time high, rising 1.1%. More than 40% of S&P 500 companies have reported quarterly earnings for the second quarter. Of those companies, 76% have posted a stronger than forecast profit. Strong U.S. GDP data added rising momentum as well. The U.S. economy expanded by 2.1% in the second quarter. Asian stocks dipped at the start of an event-filled week as investors remain pretty cautious over trade disputes and corporate earnings. The biggest decline was in South Korea on earnings concerns. The benchmark Kospi dropped 1.78%, while equity benchmark in Japan, Nikkei, slipped by 0.19%.
Now, we saw President Trump is trying to shake things up again in global trade, this time calling on the WTO to stop describing countries as developing if their economies are strong. This is aimed at China and several other countries, including South Korea. Where's he going with this?
U.S. President Donald Trump threatened to withdraw recognition of the special developing country status of relatively rich countries, including Singapore, China, and South Korea, at the World Trade Organization unless changes are made to the body's rules. Developing country status in the WTO allows governments longer timelines for implementing free trade commitments, as well as the ability to protect some domestic industry and maintain subsidies. The Trump administration has long complained that WTO rules are unfair to the U.S. and viewed WTO rules as unable to rein in China's trade practices. If the Trump administration moves forward with steps outlined in the memo to stop treating certain countries as developing economies, it would likely be another move toward essentially ignoring some WTO rules. And this will put more pressure on China for the U.S.-China trade negotiations.
Now, you mentioned some caution among investors. This week, we'll see the much-anticipated meeting at the Fed when there's a consensus pretty much that it'll cut interest rates. We also have the latest round of trade talks between the U.S. and China. Give us a look at the week ahead.
This week is filled with important events to which investors pay lots of attention, featuring an expected Federal Reserve interest rate cut, the resumption of U.S.-China trade talks, and further corporate earnings releases. Investors await a potential rate cut from the Federal Reserve this week. The Fed is scheduled to start its two-day monetary policy meeting on Tuesday. An announcement on rates is set for Wednesday. U.S. and Chinese trade negotiators will meet in Shanghai this week for their first in-person talks since a G20 truce last month. But expectations are low for a breakthrough. Investors are skeptical about the prospects of a broader agreement that includes the more challenging security-related issues. Release of earnings report on the S&P 500 companies will continue this week on. Earnings calendar shows such companies as Apple, Qualcomm, General Electric, Verizon, and ExxonMobil will release their earnings report this week.
All right, Dr. Huang, that's where we'll have to leave it today. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you.
Now, South Korea's National Assembly kicked off a new parliamentary session today. The main opposition Liberty Korea Party and the minor Bareunmirae Party had submitted a request last week that the legislature address growing security concerns following North Korea's recent missile launches and the airspace violations by China and Russia. It's slow going so far, though. The rival parties have yet to agree on the session's agenda. The ruling Democratic Party says it will only cooperate if the opposition parties agree to approve the $5.7 billion extra budget bill that's been sitting in limbo for over 3 months. The conservative opposition fired back, saying it's just as urgent to review the government's security policies. They added that they never said they won't work on the budget, but vowed to scrutinize it carefully and make cuts where necessary, given that part of it is to be funded through debt. The top trade negotiators of the U.S. and China will be meeting this week, and there's speculation the two sides could make modest progress towards a deal. The Wall Street Journal on Sunday cited sources close to the talks who expressed optimism they could agree to smaller, more attainable conditions rather than sweeping ones. That would include a commitment from Beijing to buy large amounts of U.S. soybeans and action from Washington to relax its ban on U.S. companies doing business with Huawei. U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer and Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin are due in Shanghai on Tuesday. They'll hold talks with Beijing's top negotiator, Vice Premier Liu He. That meeting should set the stage for tackling bigger issues in follow-up talks in Washington. Korea's two biggest car makers are nearing another major milestone. By next year, Hyundai Motor and Kia Motors are expected to have sold 100 million vehicles overseas. They said Monday that they're at around 92 million now. This would be 45 years since they started exporting. And that growth is due to their increasing number of factories overseas, now at 20 factories in 13 countries. The first country they exported to was Qatar, and that was in 1975. The number of men working in the private sector who took paternity leave in the first half of this year was up nearly 31% from the same period last year to slightly over 10,000. That's being attributed partly to a changing social atmosphere and policies that encourage a better work-life balance. But financial support from the government is considered the most important reason. According to the Labor Ministry, there's been a gradual increase in the number of men on paternity leave each year since 2009, when just 502 men took paid leave. Paternity leave was introduced in 2001, but that year, just 2 people used it. We're right in the middle of peak vacation season here in Korea, and that means traffic on the highways will be reaching a peak in the days to come. That's especially true on highways heading to and from the beaches on the East Coast. Park Se-young has more.
This year's summer vacation season will peak between July 27th and August 9th, with about half of all Korean holidaymakers planning to travel during those 2 weeks. According to a survey of 7,000 households nationwide by the Korea Transport Institute, an average of 4.9 million vacationers a day will hit the roads between July 25th and August 11th, making a total of over 88 million journeys. That's up 1.7% from the previous year's daily average. With over 84% of travelers saying they will drive, the Transport Ministry has declared the 18-day period this summer's peak season for highway traffic. Expressways leading out of the capital area are predicted to be the busiest on July 31st and August 1st, and they'll be the most clogged with homeward-bound travelers from August 3rd to 4th. As for getaway destinations, the most popular choice was the east coast of Korea, followed by the south coast and Jeju Island. This means the Yeongdong Expressway is likely to be the most crowded, followed by the Gyeongbu Expressway and Seoyan Expressway. To ease highway traffic during the peak season, drivers will be informed of alternative routes, and the hard shoulder will be used as an extra lane. Drones will be deployed to look for traffic violations and accidents. The Transport Ministry has also announced special measures, including increasing the operations of public transportation to help reduce traffic congestion. Park Se-young, Arirang News.
And those heading overseas this summer are reminded that credit cards lost there or illegally copied should be reported to the local police and frozen immediately. That's according to Korea's Financial Supervisory Service, which says cases of credit card theft tend to surge in the third quarter of the year. The agency suggests that vacationers reduce their credit card limits, avoid ATMs in secluded areas, and keep receipts for every transaction. They should also avoid using what's called dynamic currency conversion, which makes travelers pay in Korean currency while abroad, and that means extra transaction fees. If a card is used without authorization, make sure to get a police report from the local authorities and submit it to your card company. And that brings us to the end of this newscast. Thank you for watching. More live news coming your way at 7 p.m. Korea time.